Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. It's another edition of Techno Brew. I'm really excited because I get to talk to Nicola Francis. Nicola, this has been a topic that I have been really looking forward to. Um, I feel like most everyone I talk to has a little degree of this, like this, our topic being, going from fraud to fearless and getting to know the inner imposter. So um, we kind of met organically, you and and I think what drew me to you was your focus on ADHD because I'm definitely ADHD diagnosed and whatnot, and I really was fascinated by what you're accomplishing, with live coaching. And so, you know, uh, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy that we met organically. Thank you. LinkedIn win, right?
Right.
And I'm
That's right.
excited to
That's
talk
right.
about this topic.
Yeah, yeah. I always like to start too with because it's always interesting how all of our guests have this meandering route for the most part to where they end up. Sometimes it's a direct route, but oftentimes it's a really kind of like peaks and valleys and winding roads and long stretches. But I'm curious what brought you to coaching entrepreneurs and professionals living with ADHD, and and kind of like exploring all that the diagnosis brings along with it, right? So you had a
Mm,
pretty like significant and impactful role in the corporate world as a CPA and a CMA in tech and telecom. So that's that's quite a transition.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's a deep set of questions. How long do we have? No, I'm just kidding. So, um, I'll start with Nobi Live really started like 10 years before the business really had a name. And at that time, I was 30. I was a designated accountant. I was 6 years into 6 years, yeah, 6 years into my corporate work. But I was only a year and a half into like finance and accounting in the truest sense, like as a CPA. And I hated it. Like nothing, it didn't, the work wasn't for me. I don't think people thought the work was for me either. Like nothing sat well. And that was a tough realization to have at that moment because up until then, everything and anything I wanted revolved around that. Like I was like, yes, want to be a designated accountant, want to do this work. Like I had always wanted that. And
Yeah.
so I had a decision to make. Like, do I stay or do I go? And it felt like I had just started. And so, anyhow, I decided to pivot my career into sales and sales analytics and go back and work for a company that I was happy working for and people I was happy working with. But that one decision turned into what happened to be a year of essentially tearing down every part of my life. So it started with
Hmm.
that career decision, turned into health challenges, um, long-term partner relationships ending, intimate partners. I walked away from friendships that were no longer serving me, lost my home, like all the things. Like I
Yeah.
faced all of the fears in like a 12-month period, things I never thought I would face. And
Wow.
I was like really
Sure.
riding the rocks. Interestingly, in my professional work, what I had always done and what I had always loved to do is have these little coffee chats with people. Talk about like, so it's either the people I was like directly mentoring or leading, but also like broader people that I would just like meet up with on campus. And our
Yeah.
discussions were often around like professional development, growth, like where does that look like? What does that look like? And but
Yeah.
as I started to like really face my own, can I swear? My own shit. Am I allowed to swear? Is this
Absolutely.
listed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Those conversations started to evolve into
Yeah.
like, what do you want to do? Where do you think like life could be versus where it
Yeah.
should be? because I had been stuck in this like box of like, oh, this is how it needs to be. And I loved how those conversations started to evolve as I started to evolve. And that just became like one thing after another that got me to the point in which I knew I wanted to do something more. Um, I guess I'm going to stop there. The ADHD part came after I started the business when one of my clients with ADHD
Right.
said, like, ADHD coaching is a thing. And I was like, what? I had no clue. I was a professional coach at the time, but I didn't know that ADHD as a specialization was a thing that existed.
Sure.
And my experience with ADHD is I have ADHD in my family. I'm surrounded by friends, colleagues, business partners with ADHD. And so I know ADHD intimately. And so when I learned that I could help people in this way, am I frozen, Carlos? Or am I okay?
No, not at all. You're good.
Okay. Um, yeah, and I started to educate myself on it. I was like, oh, this is the jam. Like, I can help people tap into their strengths and their superpowers, create the structure and accountability to like do the thing for people that I love working with. Yes. And so that brought me really to this point where now 90% of my practice is ADHD.
Yeah. I love I mean that's I can relate to the sort of the screeching halt of the previous life, and kind of like within a span of just months, things kind of unraveling, and having to kind of like almost like rediscover yourself and reinvent yourself perhaps. And you kind of did it like organically, kind of. You found out, I guess you found your passion just by accident, right? Helping others, and then focusing on ADHD, right? And it's such a resonant topic for so many professionals and entrepreneurs. And I mean, ironically, LinkedIn, um, you know it, as a platform, this whole highlight reel culture where people are
Mm,
sharing their successes and their accomplishments, and it can really like exacerbate these feelings of inadequacy. And so there's this pressure to perform and compare, and we all know comparison is the thief of joy. So I
mm,
wonder if maybe it's worth stepping back a little bit and just kind of like defining, like, from your perspective as an ADHD and life change coach, how do you define the inner imposter, and what does it typically feel like for your clients?
mm, Okay, very good to define. And so I look at the inner imposter as okay, let's take a step back even further to
Sure.
imposter syndrome, or like this
Yeah.
term imposter phenomenon that was coined like back in the 70s. And what that talks about, or what the imposter syndrome is this pattern of feeling that is derived from self-doubt, right? And so self-doubt, fine, it's your own experience, but it's really rooted in fear, a fear of being found out, and that pattern of feeling like you're going to be found out, feeling like you're going to be rejected. And so, if that is imposter syndrome, what I call the inner imposter is the personification of that feeling. And so, what I mean by personification is like it's the voice that we hear, it's the
Mm,
action that we take, it's the behaviors, it's how we show up in the world when we feel that pattern of fear, or like we're not good enough, we don't belong, we're going to be rejected. And so,
mm,
what that can feel like and look like, that inner imposter, we know well, is like that inner voice. It can look like an inner bully, an inner critic. Like, why did you do that? You could have done better. You should have known, those types of comments.
yeah.
Um, it can also be like quite pervasive and quiet and look like action that we take. I heard the other day from somebody who's in job searching, like in the midst of job searching, and she says, yeah, like I'm applying for jobs that are way under my capability, like because the market is tough, and she's feeling the strain, and she's like, yes, I'm going
Sure.
low, I'm going low. She's like, I think that's my inner like saboteur. I'm like, yeah, interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
there's that fear of not being enough. So then you step back and into a place
Right.
where, you're not stepping into your whole self. So
Right.
yeah.
So
Does that answer?
devaluing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
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 And you talked about being kind of unhappy in that um, I think you said a designated accountant role.
Hmm.
You weren't happy. I'm just wondering if you had any personal encounters with your inner imposter during those years, and I guess how did that and was that experience? I guess did that inform your understanding of it now?
Mm, yes. So yeah, that's a great and very interesting question, because like I always wanted to be the accountant, right? I said that. I always wanted to be the accountant. I always wanted to be the accountant. But as soon as I got there and held the title, and maybe once I did the work too, I really like the actual job of what it was. It was really clear that it wasn't for me. But
Mm,
even when I pivoted careers, like the story I just told, I kept my accounting designation. I kept it actually until last year. So I was
right,
technically designated for like 18 years or something like that.
right,
But that, just having that title, and for the 10 years that I remained in corporate, and people would say like, "Oh, you're an accountant." Like, you know this. I was like, "Hire a real accountant. Like, don't ask me." And those were like always the words that would come out of my mouth, like, I'm not a real accountant, blah, blah, blah. And like, you have to wonder, like, what makes a real accountant? Is it the paperwork? I don't know. Is it the way you
right.
feel? But that feeling never left me, ever.
Yeah,
And it always informed my, first of all, this need to not need wanting to then explore, because I was like, if this isn't for me, then what is? Then what is? Then what is? And that would always fuel my interest and my curiosity to be looking for what I did feel was right for me. And funny enough, it was the thing I wasn't getting paid for when I was
right.
working in the corporate world, right? It was these coffee chats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks also for kind of like I guess um, outlining the inner imposter being kind of that personification of
Mm.
that imposter syndrome or self doubt. Because there was a question prior to us going live from Arturo, who asked, is the inner imposter just another term for self doubt, right? And I guess they're related, but it's very different. It's kind of like the action and the thing that goes along with that, the seed of self doubt. I guess. I mean, am I getting that right?
Hmm.
Is anything else that's
Hmm.
distinct that would set it apart?
Yeah, I think the thing that I want to call out that is really the thread, and I think I believe, and at least for my brain, it's easier to like grasp, which then makes it easier to work on, is that this thought or feeling of self-doubt is rooted in the core emotion of fear.
Right.
And that's really important to acknowledge and call out, that it's fear, 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 because when we do, it helps us understand it a little more. And I know we're going to get to the place of like strategies and what we can do to work on it, but it kind of
Yeah.
clarifies that, like, okay, like this is a scared or afraid part of us, right? And
Yeah.
that concept of like, is it just self-doubt, or like, and is it in our brains? A fear is gonna, it can begin and end here, but it's gonna be informed like by how we operate in the world, who we operate with, and where we operate, right? So these, like, I picture these spheres of where we are in the world, whether that's social media, whether it's our place of work, whether it's people that we connect with randomly, or our friends, or our relationships. Um, they all input into this machine that we call the brain, and then output in terms of our thoughts and how we then turn those thoughts into emotions like fear or joy, or, um, well, the other five core emotions. Or, and I should say, how that translates into our feelings and our actions and behaviors. So it can be in part an inside job, but
Yeah,
it's informed by your surroundings.
that's really that's really interesting, and actually it leads into my next question because I was gonna ask you like what are I guess what are the unique ways that the inner imposter manifests or is amplified, I guess, for individuals with ADHD, given that that's your specialization, right? I'm especially interested in it because I'm, as I mentioned, I'm diagnosed as ADHD, and I'm very familiar with with feelings of being an imposter at various times during my life.
Mm, yeah, okay. And so let's start maybe with like what ADHD is, because I think that there's probably, and can you see me, Carlos? Or did my camera
Yeah,
go?
you're a little frozen right now,
Mm-hmm.
but I can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna keep talking and you pause me if we need to like do something. I
Yeah,
can
maybe if you
change
turn off your camera and turn it
my,
back on, maybe that'll help too, just to kind of reset or
okay,
something.
okay.
But I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to change signals here.
All right. We're making changes on the fly here. We can pretend you're a correspondent that's available by phone, and I've got a still frame of you that we're working on.
Oh, I love that.
So while you're doing that, um, what is ADHD? Oh, there you
Ah,
are.
am I back?
You are.
Ah,
You
okay.
are. Yeah,
Sorry about that.
we were talking about ADHD. You were going to define ADHD for us.
Yes, please. Okay. So ADHD is a brain-based condition, which is characterized by differences in the brain. And mainly, what we hear about often is these differences in neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine. And what happens when we have these brain differences is that things like regulating attention, regulating activity, and regulating executive function is challenged. And it's important to say that because executive function, which are like the higher level cognitive processes of the brain, think like the CEO of the brain. Um, if those are challenged, makes things like or experiences like the inner imposter syndrome more prevalent. And why that is because executive function governs self-awareness. So that's our ability to notice when the imposter has entered the room or notice that voice or our action. The brain's braking system, so that ability to pause and like question or get curious about the inner imposter. Um, Working memory to remember all of the great successes and achievements. And that actually is a key piece of imposter syndrome because oftentimes that doubt, that pervasive doubt or fear exists even when there's success and achievement to the contrary. Or people will say, like, oh, you're so good at your job, you're so good at X, Y, and Z. And you're like, really? Am I? Are you sure? Right? And so if working memory is challenged, or that ability to recall when needed, then things like imposter syndrome again can go bigger, quicker, faster. Um,
Sure.
and you know what? That's an easy way to wrap up. Like, I'm talking about the science of ADHD from a brain-based perspective, but if there's a thing that you can take away, think about ADHD, or the ADHD brain, as a Ferrari. And so a Ferrari is fast, beautiful, intelligent, sleek. We all want one. And so we want to handle the Ferrari by, like, staying on the path on the road and being able to like navigate turns and where we want to head is the direction that we're actually going. And so we don't want to swap out the Ferrari. We love the Ferrari. It's just a management and shoring up of those executive function challenges that is the thing that we want to do. And
Right.
so, yeah, does that make sense around the executive function challenges, making the imposter? And I didn't call out the real important one, which is emotional regulation from an executive function standpoint,
Right.
because
And
that
so
is the key place that I see imposter, the inner imposter, get its boost.
right, right. So I guess so. How have you observed? I guess the inner imposter. I guess manifesting specifically with with ADHD, with people with ADHD, as opposed to like maybe neurotypical or
Mm-hmm.
normies, as they would sometimes say.
Normies. Okay. Yeah. So the first place I would say is rejection sensitivity. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD, is
Okay.
prevalent in ADHD brains. Do we know?
What
Shall
is
I?
what does that mean?
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD, is a real or perceived fear of being rejected, of love being withheld, of not belonging. And that fear can be there, it's of course a spectrum, but the fear can be so intense that it can really translate into physical pain for people. Okay, so that's like, and RSD is not a diagnosable condition because it's emotion based. And you heard me earlier say emotional regulation in ADHD
Yeah.
is a place of challenge. And so because of that, it's not super clear, and a lot of people don't talk about it, but it means that emotions, negative, positive, doesn't much matter, can go from 0 to 100 real quick. And so I see that in terms of this inner imposter, because that fear of rejection and the feeling surrounding it with RSD goes beautifully hand in hand when there's that self doubt, where there's that feeling of not being good enough, or a fear of being
Yeah.
found out or not belonging. They go really
Right.
close. Another key part of where I see it is with, and I think this kind of came up, but with this like external validation or feedback that is often more sought after in ADHD experiences, because
Mm.
people have lived sometimes a whole entire life. If you're a late diagnosed or an adult diagnosed ADHDer, you've lived a lifetime of not knowing, and people around you have had a lifetime of interacting with you not knowing. And so
Right.
more than likely you've received more points of criticism, external feedback, probably maybe to the negative, definitely more negative than what did you call it? A normie, a neurotypical person.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and so what
Okay.
that
No,
means
that's
is
really good.
there's more mirroring happening, not mirroring, but there's more of that feedback loop happening. There's some
Sure.
stat by the time a 12-year-old ADHD kid is 12, they've received 20,000 more points of negative feedback or criticism than their peers.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty stark. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my next question was going to be like, like just given that stark statistic alone, right? Like how then, if you're this Ferrari, right, in your analogy, and you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to stay on the road, and you're trying to make the right turns at the right time, how does this inner imposter impact like planning and organization and task initiation for somebody like ADHD?
Ooh, yeah. And so those things that you just called out, like planning, organizing, tasks, those are all executive function um, skills. And
Right.
so the inner imposter, yeah, okay. This is where the inner imposter can put things on overdrive. This is what I see often. So our tendency, because turning and looking at this fear can feel really intense, right?
Yeah.
Intensity in emotion we talked about is already a thing, and then you add possible RSD in there, and it can feel like tough to look at. And
Yeah.
so often there's people will go one or two ways. It's either they let the imposter drive the car. They're the imposter's right at the Ferrari wheel, driving the wheel or driving the car, saying like, "Oh, we need to go here and we need to do this and we're not good enough. So like veer off the road here and speed hit that speed bump at 100 miles an hour." Whatever it
Right.
is, right? And so on that path, as you can hear, that's more of the careening path where people start to spin, do a whole bunch of shit that they don't even really want to do, but they think they should because if they do, then they'll do it. Like it's this spiraling type of nature.
Yeah.
The other path is like, oh, I'm gonna push you away, push you like out right out the car, get out the car, and pretend like you don't exist, and just like
Right.
hope that you don't come back anytime soon, right? Because I don't want to feel you. I don't want to see you. What that does is it zaps executive function. It zaps the ability to plan, to organize, to think clearly in order to do
Yeah.
those things because you're too busy spending time keeping the imposter at bay, right? It's like zapping all of the energy. That's also where self-doubt can become very big because we're technically disconnecting with a part of ourselves. But in both cases,
Yeah.
the tolerance and the stress levels in the brain are higher, which means ADHD symptoms are higher, which means things like planning, organizing tasks, working memory become more challenged.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds horrific, and I can identify with both of those situations, and I wonder if like maybe because I'm sure because I know this isn't just something that people with ADHD suffer. I mean, everyone suffers it, right? So maybe we could kind of shift the dialogue towards like a more generalized view, where like what are some of the common triggers or situations that tend to activate these the inner imposter for people in general. Like where do
Yeah.
you see that? Like like new jobs or something, or workplace pressures or
hmm So you know what I think is really cool to ground this question, first of all, is that even like
sure.
that study that was done in the 70s where the term imposter phenomenon was like coined,
Yeah.
came from a study on high achievers. And I want to say that out loud, like high achievers. Actually, I think it was like 150 high achieving women, which I think is super cool for the 70s. But
Right.
like high achievers. And so that really connects with your question around like where these trigger situations might come up. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes if you're experiencing the imposter, it's showing up because you're doing new things, meaningful things, impactful things, hard things, right? And
Yeah.
so, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing to notice, right? It's not bad. It's showing up because you're doing some cool stuff. The
Right.
workplace, if we're to think of like a professional setting, is I don't want to use the word fraught, but the word fraught comes to mind. Is like it's like quite the grounds for the imposter to show up. Okay, so
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's performance reviews, like just general feedback, taking on new initiatives, things that are unknown, um, job changes, like you were talking about job changes or job like pivots, getting to know new people, holding fresh meetings, like anything that is new, uncertain, seemingly hard, something you
Mm,
really want to be good at, but you're not there yet. Like these are the types of ways that the imposter might get louder or more present in your activity.
yeah, yeah, and I guess the irony there too is that, um, like these beautiful things, like you said, like new, challenging, wonderful things that pop up. The sad, I guess, result could be, just decreased satisfaction in your job or motivation, burnout. Burnout, something that I talk about quite often with
Mm,
other guests of mine. And talking about people on the autism spectrum, and the very behavior of masking and trying to present as neurotypical causes these feelings of burnout and these feelings of imposter syndrome as well, or the inner imposter coming out. And so it really is something that affects a lot of people, and has this effect of silencing people too. You talked about the careening car versus the I'm going to push you out the door, and it just kills motivation, kills your drive, your
mm,
planning, your ability to like maybe speak up or volunteer information in the workplace for fear of like looking like a fool, perhaps. Um,
mm-hmm. So
and,
right.
and so beyond, I guess, we're talking about kind of the impact and how it manifests. um, how you focus on professionals and entrepreneurs, right? That's a focus of yours in terms of like the people that you're helping. What are some, I guess, um, I know we've talked about some, but have we missed some of the more tangible ways that the inner imposter can hold back these individuals in their careers and businesses? I mean, there's a reason why they're coming to you in the first place. I imagine, right?
Mm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what I hear, and I'm going to try to be general and specific at the same time if that's possible, but
Sure.
what it is kind of what you just said around the holding back. Because when we're not in touch with why the imposter is showing up, which is what we'll talk about when we talk about strategies, and we're
Hmm.
doing that thing of either letting it drive or pushing it out of the car, in neither of those situations are you tapping into your own wisdom, strengths, skills. You're busy masking, you're busy holding it at bay. And so what transpires there is there's no energy to do the real work or to show up as you like can, and you can't even get clear on what it is that you truly want because it's so clouded by this fear response, which is a real response in our bodies, right? It's like that fight or flight. When you're up active or up regulated and operating there, it's really hard to do your best work, to do your best, to show up in your best way. And so oftentimes that is everything when it comes to the holding back around progressing. Not to mention, people see that and feel that, right? You have leaders
Yeah.
that are inconsistent. They show up one day like everything is like la la la, and the next day they're like off the hook, and you're like, what is going on, right? Like, what is happening? And they're
Yeah.
like, they're dealing with their own thing, and that kind of behavior that's inconsistent with who you are
Yeah.
is going to be a symptom of, I'm going to say, not um, not meeting the inner imposter. Let's call it that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Leaving it, I guess, untreated or unacknowledged. And I love how you
Unacknowledged.
you brought in you brought in the example of the leader, because my next question was going to be like, beyond the individual, how does the inner imposter impact team dynamics or leadership
Hmm.
effectiveness? And you really segued into that really nicely, because it has this trickle down effect, right?
Yeah. Yes. As like a leader for a team, or you can bring it personal and say a parent for a family, or a friend for a friend, or I'm going to say a person in the world, but let's be specific, a leader in a team. It's like if you're not doing the work of tuning in to your own fears and how they're looking like the imposter in different ways and scenarios, then you aren't going to be able to hold space or have the capacity to let other people around you, namely on your team, do the same thing, which means no capacity for probably new ideas, the ability to like let go of control and relinquish control a little bit because you're afraid. You're operating from a fear-based response system. And so that looks like highly controlled, maybe erratic, inconsistent, the inability to be like vulnerable. We think about vulnerability
Yeah.
as being like a negative thing in the workplace, but that is where creativity comes, where new ideas are bred, where people feel okay to not be perfect all the time or like have this,
Right.
you know, mask. And so if the person that's at the helm is not stepping into that for themselves, I'm going to bet they're not doing it at least to the level that they could with their teams. And that creates
Yeah.
the exact breeding ground for what you don't want.
Yeah. And I love how we're talking about we're talking about teams in this context here, but yeah, it can show up for people, for persons, as you said. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and on that note, then there are obviously going to be different like manifestations. Um, how does it show up differently? I guess for someone who's just starting out in their career, like the new person on the team, versus the leader, or the seasoned professional in the middle of the pack, right? I mean, you've got
Yeah.
this like this field, this this team of imposters essentially that potentially are coming together, right? And so it just I guess
Mm-hmm.
maybe that question is better addressed by like kind of going into like strategies then. But like, have you
Mm-hmm.
seen like team dynamics, like where the this inner imposter manifests and has this effect across teams, from within the hierarchies, I suppose, across the hierarchies.
Yeah, totally. Yes, yes. And like even like within teams and across teams, I worked in a really big company. So I had lots of experience with different kinds of teams. And but what I witnessed and I hear today in the professionals that I work with, and even the entrepreneurs that are creating spaces for professionals to emerge in different parts of their career, is when you're new into a role, and it's going to depend on where that lands in your career, right? But picture your first job in your first career. You're more likely to be like open and say things like, well, I don't know, can you teach me, things like that, right?
Mm,
There's a certain point at which one might feel like I can't ask that question anymore. I should know, like I can't be
right.
going around not knowing that answer, right? And so we start to like create a little bit of a guard or a shield around like that
Mm,
knowing. And so what I hear and see is when people start to move up, or they're the founder of something of their own and they're expected to be at a certain level. And you can say the same for a high ranking leader or someone higher up in the hierarchy. That ability to let down that guard and say, yeah, that's a great idea, better than mine, even. And I don't know what the right answer is. Let's figure it out, is almost impossible unless you've done some of this reframing and processing of how your
yeah.
imposter shows up. And so I think when
Yeah.
you're asking about like, does it show up differently for someone new versus someone more tenured or at a different level? And I'm going to say, yeah, but it also depends on the human. Like what I'm saying is somebody coming in brand new to a job, they might not have that feeling of like, oh yeah, I can be a sponge. I'm allowed to learn. So it depends on the human too, and your experience and how your imposter shows up, which is so super unique to your brain and
Yeah.
your life and how you process things.
Yeah. And wow. And I guess if it's not addressed as a, and we're going to talk about this, but if it's not addressed individually or collectively as a, as a culture, I guess, imperative, you're basically going to be taking this, this new person joining the team that has this zeal and this ability to be vulnerable and kind of express they need help or can you explain this or
Mm,
whatnot. you're basically molding them into like that seasoned pro that feels like they can't be vulnerable, and you're kind of creating this repetitive cycle, right? And perpetuating this the pervasiveness of the inner imposter, I guess. So on that note, then
Mhm.
maybe we can move into like solutions, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. And can I say one more thing? Sorry, because you just made me think of
yeah,
something.
yeah,
The
please,
way that like I see it show up, or I've seen it show up too, and I think we can maybe all relate to this in some way, is like this one-upping culture. No, or not culture, but dynamic. Where like
sure.
even someone on the same team is like, oh, well, I can do that better, and I can do that better. Or another team saying like, oh, what are they doing? Like, let's do it like this. And like, but it's not from the place of like, whoa, that's a good idea. Let's collaborate and how can we make it better? It's I can do it better or we can do it better. And it's this mountain
Hmm.
or like steep
Yeah,
climb. That to me is like a real sign of an imposter in the hiding somewhere or a not good enough because it's like everyone's looking for their proof point.
yeah, and it's an antagonistic way of collaborating, if that at all. I mean, it's very us versus them, as opposed to like how do we collectively combat this issue or reach our our stated goals and strategic imperatives. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad we're kind of talking about that. So what are some initial steps or foundational strategies that some can start to take, in recognizing and challenging their inner imposter?
Yeah. This is the beautiful work. And so I want to come back to the acknowledgement that this inner imposter is a fear response.
Yeah,
So it's not showing up like if the voice that you hear or the behavior that you're taking, like if right up front when you hear and feel that, you can say like, ah, this is a part of me that's actually afraid. It's not annoying, it's not stupid, crazy, lazy, it's not, all these bad names that we might want to call it. It's actually a part that needs some attention, and that attention is the thing that we often don't give it because it's and I say give it because I'm personifying it like we're talking
sure.
about,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
of course it's part of us, yeah.
yeah,
And so the first part is to like notice it and name it. And so there's a researcher, Valerie, I have her name somewhere. She's like a imposter, Valerie Young. She's an imposter syndrome like guru. And she talks about the imposter, the work that she did created these like personas of what the imposter is. And that is really powerful because it gives you a tool to name your imposter. And so her five groups, and like you can Google it and look it up, but you'll
sure.
probably hear something that resonates is like the perfectionist, the expert. Okay, so the perfectionist is setting really high levels all the time,
Yeah,
unattainable levels all the time, right? The expert needs to know everything before they can speak or share. I'm going to watch your face. Like, you're like, check, check. Okay. The next, so we got the perfectionist, we have the expert. The next one is the soloist, the person that needs
okay,
to do everything on their own to feel good enough, right? They don't like to
right.
ask for help. Hmm. The fourth is the superhero, the person that needs to work harder than everybody else, burnout
Hmm.
people, to
Yeah,
to to feel good enough, right? Okay, so
sure.
perfectionist, expert, the soloist, the superhero, and the last is the natural genius. So the person that needs to have things come easy or they
Mhm.
feel like they're not good enough. Like if it's too hard, they're like, oh, this is like, why am I like I'm not smart enough, that.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, how are you? Do you like these personas?
I don't know if I like them, but I can definitely identify with most of them, right? Um, yeah, and
And
some of them are better at in my advanced years now. Um, better, I'm better at I guess counteracting it. Like we talk about the soloist, for example, right? I'm more inclined these days to like, okay, let's like I'm definitely actually I lean towards the collaborative nature, right? Like, and reaching out to you and having conversations with subject matter experts like yourself. It's part of that, right? It's part of this. This is almost like an exercise in kind of like letting go of that soloist, right? And not needing to know everything, not needing to be the expert, because that's totally me. I like to research, know who I'm talking to, try to like become like almost like an apprentice subject matter expert in their topic so that I can have a meaningful conversation. Because I that's what I'm so I have these, and I want you to feel like we're having a great conversation, and that Carlos isn't wasting my time. Kind of like so. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a lot to unpack in this brain here, so maybe we should save that for another episode.
No, but you're like, okay, this is so real though. Because okay, and see how and you can connect to all five of them in different ways. You didn't talk about the
Yeah,
natural genius, but I bet it's in there. And so that's the point here is if we can notice it, and I'm saying a big if on purpose because I'm going to come back to this, but if we can notice the voice, if we can notice the pattern, it's meaningful or a great strategy to name which one is showing up. And because I'm a proponent of like fun, I like to have my clients, and even I do it for myself, is I don't just like name the perfectionist. I like make the name fun. The purpose there is to like have fun, but also remember it. So like my perfectionist panda, she's so cute and snuggly, and she shows up kind of all the time. But like we got to know each other a little bit, and so we're building a relationship, you might say. But if you can name it, you can remember it, and then it can also serve as some self-regulation, particularly on the emotional front, because remember, we're dealing with a fear response here. And
yeah,
so, first thing, name it. If you can relate to one of those five categories, cool. If you can give it a fun name that you can remember, cool. Whatever works for you, but name
hmm
it and notice it for sure. The next part, which is really important, is we're remembering that it's a fear response, right? I'm saying this a million times on purpose because from that lens, then we can be compassionate. We don't want to throw it out of the car and we don't want to let it drive because that's not compassionate to us and our whole being. We want to kind of meet it. And like, so what I like to do with clients, and we're obviously not going to do it here today, but is like, let's park the Ferrari, get out, set up a little picnic, and meet, in my case, Perfect Panda, and say, like, what's up, Perfect Panda? Like, why did you show up today? Cool. I have a listen to her. And what are you trying to show me? And what are you trying to tell me? And this serves a few different purposes. Number one, you're welcoming in a part of yourself that is a part of yourself. And so rather than disconnecting, we're getting to connect with a part of ourselves. And that part of ourselves holds some wisdom. It might not be the whole wisdom. It usually is not the whole wisdom, but there's something there. The response is coming because there's a fear of something. Maybe something happened in the past, or maybe for me, Perfect Panda shows up to say, like, we really want you to be good at this because we really want you to like do the thing you love, which is helping people. Okay, so if you mess this up, you might not do it, and we don't want you to mess it up because right? It's like in a spiral.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so
So,
when I
so there
can
might
have
be
this,
some aspects,
yeah,
I guess, where that self doubt or that the panda, like the perfect panda, can also drive some growth, I guess, right? And it's differentiating between that, like, I guess, constructiveness and destructiveness, I guess, of that
yeah,
self reflection or something, right? Is that
yeah,
am I getting that right?
yeah, it's coming from a place of learning and compassion. These are like the key things, right? If we know that this is a fear response, then let's compassionately look towards this part of us as we would a friend, right? If a friend was
Right.
coming to you with this saying, we're really concerned about this,
Yeah,
how would you talk to them, right? Would you say, I don't want to talk to you right now, go away? You might say, okay, tell me what you have to say. And
yeah,
you would listen. And then you might offer back to say, I hear you. Thank you for saying those things. I want you to
yeah,
know this time is a little different, right? Because these parts of us are working on the past. They don't know the future. They're not psychics. And so we need to kind of shore them up and say, hey, yeah, we got this. And this time we're going to be doing this a little bit different. We know it's scary, it feels uncertain, but here's how we're planning around that. You know, it's a little conversation with the friend or yourself in a way that feels um,
Yeah.
possible. And so I want to just plant a thing here that sometimes this work of like what I'm calling like tuning into this part of ourselves
Yeah.
can feel okay to do. And sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't feel okay, okay? Because this is a fear response. And the fear could be a present fear, or it could be something that happened in the past. And depending on how big that thing was that happened in the past, we want to tread carefully and mindfully. And so, you know, if after this call you're like, I'm going to tune into this part of myself, welcome them to the table and have a coffee with them and say, what's up? What do you want to say? And it feels like, holy shit, right away. Let's know that we can like pause and stop that and ask for help. Okay. This is what like IFS therapists like do, or therapists in general will help you like go into these deeper places with a partner. I do it with
Yeah.
clients from a coaching perspective. We go forward, like we're looking at things that are present that are showing up. I'm not going to go back to like childhood things and parental things.
Sure.
But it's important to say that, you know, because what I'm asking people to do is like get to know a part of themselves, and sometimes that part of us isn't ready to get a comfy seat at the table yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate. I mean, I can see that. I mean, there's a degree of like mindfulness in your practice, I couldn't help but think of like there's dialectical behavioral therapy that's kind of derived from Buddhism, and it's kind of looking at these emotions and maybe an imposter, an inner imposter, with a third person perspective, like somebody, you know, it's kind of like saying, hey, yeah, there's that fear again, you know, and you're sitting on the banks of a river, and you know there's a fear, and you know don't jump on the fear raft and go along for the ride. Just acknowledge it, and it's going to pass. And after fear comes like maybe relief, or you know, I don't know, terror. Who knows? But you know, the point being that it's an impermanent thing, and so you don't get stuck into it. I guess is kind of like what you're kind of advocating, is like kind of like, you know, addressing it, acknowledging it, and naming it. I like how you say that, you know, kind of naming what you're experiencing, and maybe, you know, having that engagement with it, where it's you're deriving some kind of growth or self awareness from the experience. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's it's a hopeful thing, because I was there was I can't remember what was it. I think it was an MIT Sloan. Yeah, it was an MIT Sloan study, and it was suggesting that imposter syndrome is, here's the quote, it's more fluid and dynamic than previously thought, not a permanent trait. So it offers like this hopeful perspective, right?
Yeah,
Do you agree with that?
totally. Yeah, because it comes in and out, and it it's what's the word? It's not grow, but like your experience of it and how you react when it shows up or enters the room, I like to say, can change over time with practice. And so if we're able to notice it, if we're able to tune into it, if we're able to have that compassionate lens and really be curious enough to learn. And then I also want to say one last strategy here would be, after we do the hard thing, like, so if we meet the imposter and say, yeah, okay, we hear that you're scared, but we need to do this thing anyways, because either we need to or we want to, that feedback loop after you do the hard thing, to really take a moment to say like, wow, I did that hard thing. I didn't think I could do X, Y, and Z, but I did it anyways. Here's what I learned, and give that back to yourself. It creates a positive feedback loop, because the next time your imposter shows up, it's going to have what it had plus a little bit more, plus a little bit more around the facts of the situation. And that having the facts around the situation versus the story will transform over
Yeah.
time. And that's where the growth happens. That's truly where the growth happens. And that's where I think it can kind of relate to this fluid nature, where it's not a stuck thing and it's not just going to be how it is, especially if you're doing the work of like getting to know it and like nurturing that part of
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, easier said than done, I guess. But with the right, I guess, strategies in place, um, definitely something that that we can, I guess, we can all kind of overcome.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of the time. We've got 5 minutes left, right? Because the time kind of
Mm,
flew. Because it is such a heady topic, right? And there's so much to
mm,
and we haven't really I was going to like mention again. We talked a little bit beforehand about AI imposter syndrome, right? This
mm,
fascinating new concept, where success comes so easily because people are using AI to help them with their work efforts, and so with that effort and access, it kind of like there's these feelings of uh, like almost like they're hiding their AI usage, and almost like considering like AI as a crutch. And then it has this ironic effect of like making people feel even more imposter like, I suppose, and that imposter voice loud in his head. But I suppose it's just the newest iteration of what you're dealing with already. So I mean, um, maybe it's just an interesting kind of anecdote that just pops up today, in today's context, right? That maybe would have been um, not even considered 5 years ago, perhaps, probably. So yeah, there's
mhm.
never a dull moment, I suppose, when it comes to like the quirks of the mind, right?
Yeah, and how tech can interface and intertwine with that. Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess maybe I guess how if you were to like, I guess, have some advice for leaders and colleagues on how to create environments then that minimize kind of like because we talked about the team dynamics, and we
Hmm.
talked about some strategies, but what are some things that organizations and leaders can do to minimize, I guess, the potential for creating an inner imposter breeding ground within teams, and what comes to mind for you?
Oh, this is a good one. And it's not as profound as maybe one might expect, but I think it's the deep thing is like individuals need to do their own work. So if you want to foster an environment where you're not perpetuating things like imposter syndrome or people feeling like afraid of being themselves, then you need to do the work for
Yeah,
yourself, I believe, in order to show up
yeah,
true, full, consistent. Like you need to go through that process of facing your own fears so you can help other people and even clock that that's what needs like doing in other people. And I think that's
yeah,
where the transformation comes. And I've seen it time and time again with leaders. You see great leaders and you talk to them and they've
yeah,
been through some shit. They've been through the
yeah,
struggle and they're not afraid
yeah,
to talk about it. And
yeah,
that, and it's,
yeah,
I don't, and of course with boundaries, this like the professional world is not about like, here, take all my like stuff, but it is
yeah,
important to be human and to do your own work so
yeah,
that you enable others
yeah,
to step into that as well.
yeah. And sadly, it sounds like it's really uh it's got to be almost like a top down type of initiative. It's got to start from the top, um,
Mm,
to really have that overall organizational effect, especially like, because yes, it's an inside job and you got to do the work, but um, and maybe that helps me to work within the context of my team. But in terms of like changing the dynamic of the team, I'm a
mm,
cog in the wheel, and the wheel, has maybe it's part of a bigger thing, and that maybe that's where I guess I don't know if I'm
mm,
articulating this properly, but I feel like it's got to be something that's really endorsed from the higher tiers of the hierarchy, I guess, in order to be effective. Like, does that would you say there's a degree of truth to that, or am I kind of reading too much into that?
No, I think that that's true, but I also, so I would say, and I think that the work can be done like at all levels. Like, I don't think it's a hierarchy thing. I think it's an individual thing. The thing that the leaders
Yeah,
then can do, though, on top of that, is that empowerment, right? So once you can do that own transformation for yourself, or at least begin into the pursuit of, then you can
sure.
empower people around you because you're no longer afraid of X, Y, and Z, of, you don't have to hold all the control, like, because those are the things that then start impacting the team, or the
Yeah, I like
ideas, or the
that.
credibility, right? Like, you can start empowering people because
Yes,
you feel okay to do it.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's empowering. It's um, it really requires, I guess, if you're coming from an organization that where it's pervasive, it does require a very challenging and difficult maybe shift in culture, and maybe that's a different conversation.
Mm,
But I totally agree. Yeah, I guess we're at the hour mark, and I want to ask you, like, if you were to give a single takeaway that you would hope the audience remembers from this conversation, what would that be about managing their inner imposter?
mm. I would say, remember, or like, try to remember that this part of us, or you, all of us, is not a bad part, and that there's wisdom, there's learning. So pay attention to it. Don't let it drive the Ferrari, and then, like, keep going, and keep welcoming it to the table. Keep having coffee with it. Getting to
Right.
know it and giving back, like, your learnings, so that you can grow from and through that fear, versus trying to push it one way or another.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. And for those in our audience who are struggling with their inner imposter, how can they best connect with you and learn more about No Be Live coaching?
Thank you. Oh yes, I love to like, yes, if anybody even just wants to have a chat, this topic is dear, but the purpose of it is really key. So you can email me at Nicola at no KNOW live coaching.com, or you can check out my website and hit start now and book a call, and we can just chat, get to know each other, and see if this topic can unfold for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've put up that information here as well. And I've also provided your LinkedIn um, profile, as well as the No Be Live coaching profile on LinkedIn. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Nicola. It's such a pleasure to speak with you and to learn more about this. And I hope we have an opportunity to have a sequel sometime in the future, and
Yes.
kind of revisit the topic, because I suspect it's not going to go away, and so there will always be a need for these conversations. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight with everyone.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you for your insightful probing and questions. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me here.
Right. Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.